and welcome back to the SaaS Developer Community, where we talk about building SaaS and learning from each other. I have a special guest today. We have Yoav from Wix.
Hi, everyone.
And Yoav is a chief architect and head of Wix's Velo product. And we're really here to talk about Velo in depth because we had an interesting conversation in the community about dogfooding and can you really build customer-facing product on your own product and doing both together at the same time. And people told me that Wix did it. I went to Wix and they said that Yoav is the person who led the charge from day zero until today, and he could talk about the product, the architecture, and the lessons learned building Wix on Wix. So let's get started. So first of all, you're chief architect. Tell us some highlights about Wix and the architecture.
Okay, so people know Wix as we're a provider of websites, and there's probably a lot of companies that are providing websites. Some more known, some less known, and it sounds very simple. It's a website. It's just something simple. It's on the web. It's just static HTML pages and so on. Wix today is powering millions of websites. We have over 220 million users, which is more than most countries. We have a global operation across all continents and most countries. But what's more interesting, we're actually powering about 5 to 6% of the internet in terms of number of domains that have a website under them. When you look at what it means to have some operation like that, we're not doing the classic thing of a computer per website or a server per website. We're doing basically a system that is composed of, last we've heard, over 2,500 microservices. Actually, I've seen a presentation a few days ago. We have 150 clusters of MySQL, 50 Elasticsearch clusters. All of that is across 4 data centers, which are located in 3 continents. And we actually have the ability to do a high availability between data centers. We can shut down a data center and shift all the traffic to another data center. We're working on all 3 clouds. We have operations on both on AWS, GCP, and Azure. We have 2 physical data centers on top of that, and lots of investment on our internal development velocity. Work in Scala, Node.js, Java stacks, and just in terms of deployments, last time I heard the number, it was over 20,000 deployments a year.
20,000 deployments a year. So obviously we're talking about like hundreds a day, essentially.
Yes, hundreds of deployments a day. There's, in parallel to that, also experiments where we're opening and closing feature toggles and running A/B tests, probably around 100 A/B tests running at any given time. All of that is in a fully managed environment. So our users, we guarantee our users that their websites are going to work and they don't need to care about it.
Yeah, and the experience is super simple. So I think a lot of people in the world went to Wix to create a website at some point. And I actually don't have to worry about nearly anything. I design my website. I have a bunch of features that I can built in that I can pick from. So you really abstracted away almost everything. Like I don't know when you're upgrading behind the scenes anything. I definitely don't know how many microservices you have. The one thing I'm curious about, you mentioned that you're running on all the clouds. Do your customers, most of them just want a website? Do they even care if it's on Azure or AWS as long as they get a website?
No, they don't. They only care when one of the clouds fails. And the interesting stuff is we had a case probably 5 years ago where, we have media, of course, people like images and videos on the websites. For some reason, people really love pictures on the websites. And as you can imagine, we have petabytes of pictures, and they're stored both in AWS and in GCP. And there was an update on on AWS that changed some factor on their load balancer and stopped sending some header that CDN stopped caching the media. So we had to move all of our traffic to GCP. A month later, GCP had a similar case, different header, but similar case, we had to move all traffic back to AWS. And for a lot of time, we were one of the only companies that have a failover between clouds. We had to do that. And just recently, there was another outage of AWS for all availability zones in US West, I think, US East, I think. And it's not something very simple, to be able to not to fall between one availability zone to another, but to fall back from one region to another region. That's something that we're making sure we have that capability.
Yeah, and basically you need almost zero lag at very high throughput between regions and between different clouds, which sounds challenging and expensive.
Well, like anything in software architecture, when you understand the patterns, it becomes simple. It's only that you need to understand that you have to think differently a lot of times and need to find what is the right method of working. So, for instance, regular thing about doing multi-region, you can't have a multi-region replication, which is many-to-many, that never works. So you always have one region that does the writes and replications to all of the other regions to do the reads. But then when you have that basic setup, you can serve traffic from any region. And then falling back is just turning over what is the master that writes.
Yeah. I suspect you make it sound a lot easier than it actually is, but it does sound straightforward when you explain it. So we kind of we know and love Wix as this very easy to use website builder that everyone can have a website in a few clicks and few minutes and it will actually look good. How does Velo fit in?
So Velo fit in there's different ways to look at Velo. Velo actually started by, I've created the Wix app market in 2013. And we've seen the friction of creating applications on the web. When you want to build an application for the web, the first thing you need to do is bring a server and bring a database. And the place where you see the friction the most is when you're trying to do hackathons or workshops. And then you have people in the room and they're trying to set up an environment where they have a database and a server. And actually, I've done that head-to-head with a friend of mine. He was in one room, I was in the other room. I was using Google App Engine. He was using pre-made instances on AWS with PHP. And both of them were really horrible. And that kind of brought us to the understanding that what we need is a serverless solution that was before there was the name serverless. You need to have basically a managed backend, both database and compute. And the next thing that happened is that when we understood that we need to think of the different platforms we have in the world. We have platforms for backend engineers, like App Engine, and there's all kinds of other flavors like that today, Cloud Run and so on. And there is a App Run, and there is I don't remember the name of the one from Azure, but there's quite a few of those. Heroku, of course. And then you have platforms for mobile applications, Firebase, and there was Parse.com, which are all great. But there's absolutely zero platforms for the web frontend. Even today, the only one that exists is Velo. And so what it means, basically means, what does it mean to do a platform for the frontend? It means, let me give you a solution to be very effective in building the frontend. And guess what? I have that. That's Wix. But then let's give you the programmatic platform, which is basically you need a database and you need your server. And I'm going to connect those two together and give you a solution, a one-stop solution that gives all of that together. And so Velo today actually went another step going forward and says, you know what, let's give you that with zero setup. So you're getting an online ID. With the online ID, you get a Node.js server, you get a database, which is a simplified layer on top of MongoDB. You get, of course, all of that connected with the drag and drop environment of Wix. And then there's tons of other features to make you productive and to give you all kinds of other stuff that you need. And the one thing that we're not trying to do, we're not trying to compete with the clouds. If you need to do a heavy compute thingy, go and use your own instance on the cloud. If you need to have a big database, go and use your own database on the cloud. We'll give you the options to connect to them. Hey, you have Node.js, you can just connect to whatever you want. But if you want to create a user interface, a web application in the most effective way, that's Velo.
Got it. So basically, like your ideal Velo user is essentially a full stack JavaScript engineer who wants to have some of the Wix front end and some of his own logic in the backend kind of thing, exactly. And want to not think about databases and deployment. Exactly.
That's exactly all the sweet spot for.
So yeah, give us some hints. How do you, what's the architecture behind it? How do you, because you're running other people's arbitrary code, which is obviously one of the scariest things to do when you own a system. So I'm curious how you make it.
So there's two approaches to run someone else's code. One approach is use a VM. Basically, you bring up a VM per user, and obviously that is a challenge because right now we're running about 1 million backends a day. So we're trying to do a test at some point. Anyone who's listening here, try to go into your favorite cloud console and click on the user interface. I want to get 1 million something.
Yeah, that is a good point. Everyone thinks that the cloud is very infinite. Like you can create one EC2, two EC2. So you think, oh, surely I can create 10,000 and 100,000 and a million. But yeah, we also discovered that it's actually way more limited than the docs make clear.
Yeah. The thing is, when you talk to Azure people, they're going to tell you, hey, we have a limit. We do that, let's say 500,000, whatever. When you talk to AWS, they won't tell you that limit publicly. But when you talk to them, there is a limit. When you go to GCP, they're going to tell you, hey, we have a hard limit, which is somewhere there, and then we have a soft limit somewhere else, and so on. Anyway, we need 1 million backends a day. So obviously, you can't do that in the regular way. So the other option is to try and bring them up and down as you need them. Because web traffic, you don't need them operational all the time. However, in that case, we have a problem because when you do something on the website, when you're not doing Lambda or serverless in the regular way, which is event-based, when you're doing something interactive, you have a person waiting. And when you click something on the browser and you see that line underneath connecting, this is where the backend is not ready. There's no backend to get your result. And so we need to start something happening there. Now, at that point, it doesn't really matter if you're using a VM or a container or a serverless function. All of them start too slowly. They take VM minutes, and containers and Lambdas takes seconds. We need a solution of 100 milliseconds top to start the backend. So we've created one architecture which actually met that 100 milliseconds. Now we're working on another architecture, which is get us to about 20 milliseconds, which is basically we have Kubernetes, but we're not working it in a regular way. We have a fleet of containers which are identical. And then we have a logic that when a request comes, it takes one, actually those are pods, not containers. It takes one pod, assigns it to a website, copies just the code, the unique code of that website into that pod, and then serves the request. And that pod continues to be alive for 5 minutes, and then we drop it. with that architecture, we are running 1 million containers in about 30 computers, 30 hosts.
That's interesting. So yeah, you said a lot here. One of the things that sounds is like it's almost semi-serverless, right? Because you mentioned earlier that you think about number of containers a day. And I was wondering, because if I have a website and it uses Velo and I wrote some backend code, I thought that, yeah, I am getting a container that stays around, but it sounded like you actually spin up and down containers based on how, if I have no traffic, maybe you will not bother keeping my pod around.
And let's face it, that's serverless. Serverless doesn't mean that there's no server. It means there is server, just someone else is managing it. And so our user gets a serverless experience. They don't care. They get, they can get lots of traffic. We're talking about, in order to get to our limit today, it's a soft limit, by the way. Our soft limit today, in order to generate that, you need 100,000 people to visit your website today and do 10 actions against your website, which is lots of traffic. And if that is not enough, we can add that limit, increase that limit easily, per website. And with that in mind, our architecture is the way to implement serverless that spins up a container in 20 milliseconds. Now, think about what it means also. It has actually another very important impact. In the regular architecture, we have 4 data centers, right? So in regular architecture, let's say I have microservice, I need to have one running in each data center. But actually need to have 2 of them running in each data center because I need to be able to, availability. But actually I need 3 of them in each data center because I might be rolling a new version, doing an A/B test. So without even talking, I have 12 instances for any microservice.
Yeah.
In Velo, I need 1. If that's the one going to fail, I spin up another one. It takes me 20 milliseconds. I don't care about that. If that one dies, I spin another one. It takes 20 milliseconds. I don't care about that. If traffic moves to another data center, I'll spin up another one there. I don't care. So I need exactly 1 to handle all the traffic, unless you actually have enough traffic that I need 2 of them. But then you go into the auto scaling area.
Yeah. And that actually is, so you basically built high availability, cost optimization, and auto scale with one architecture, which is kind of mind-blowingly amazing.
And fault tolerant as well.
Yeah.
And actually, one thing that happened, we had a bug at some point. We had an algorithm that tries to figure out if one of our hosts is dead. And if that's the case, take it out. And that algorithm had a bug. So it would actually take down good and healthy hosts and all of the containers on them. And we didn't find that bug. Because what happened is that the traffic just shifted to another host. We didn't even see the impact. No one's seen that. The only thing that we've seen is that there was the number of hosts going down and up that rate was too high, and we figured out, hey, something is wrong here. That shouldn't happen.
It's really cool that you catch stuff in your monitoring, but actually the user experience is not significantly impacted.
They don't care about that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's like almost the holy grail. But I'm thinking about it, like it basically means that my backend code could be running in a pod that someone else's backend code was using until 5 minutes ago. So obviously, in order for stuff to be secure, sorry?
No, it's not the same pod. We would, once your 5 minutes is down, we're shutting down that pod. And we always get a new one.
Oh, got it. Okay, so I'm always getting a new one. There was never a
always get a new one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. And you're probably not going to shut it down if it's still in use, right? Like if I'm keep getting requests and so on, you'll just keep it up for me.
Oh, actually we will. After 5 minutes, we'll shut it down. And you'll get a new one after 5 minutes.
No matter what.
No matter what. And guess what? It allows us to do upgrades in a very fast manner.
Oh, interesting. And again, you kind of had to since you locked yourself into the 5 minute recycling experience, you kind of got upgrades for free, which is another thing that cloud backend sometimes struggle with.
Yeah, and we actually, that 5 minutes is configurable. I can select, if I want, I can move it to be whatever number I want per site. But actually, it's good enough. I don't, we haven't really seen any reason to change that. And see what I'm saying? I'm talking about stuff that it sounds like that can be right. You run in a server for 5 minutes and then drop in it and then bring in another one. That can be right. That doesn't make any sense. And that's why we're running for 5 years and nobody cares. The system just works and just works well.
It's kind of like, it's the kind of thing you read about, and like the crash only or crash first architecture. So you kind of go to a conference and you read about it, and then like, oh, it's a nice idea, like, and see how you'd want to move in that direction. Like chaos engineering, it seems like a nice thing to aspire to, but surely it's too extreme for most normal cases. And then here you are. Actually, it seems like making us what initially probably seemed like an extreme choice actually ended up giving you a lot of superpowers.
I'll give the last point here is that the reason we built this architecture is the cost. Because my cost today for a container, for a website, for a session of 5 minutes is measured in 0.001 cents.
Oh, so that's also your billing unit. You bill per 5 minutes of a container.
No. I don't even bill for that.
Oh.
I have no reason to do that. Velo is free today.
I had no idea. That's pretty cool.
And Wix costs money, but there's premiums packages of Wix. But because our cost in Velo for the basic stuff is so low, I don't need to charge up the when you go to any other platform, you'll get some free quota, but then you always go into a premium plan, and it's always going to be tens of dollars per month minimum. And in our case, they will get the same service at the cost, which is about 1,000 times lower cost. So I can just, if the Wix premium plan is $10 to $35, $40, depends what you're taking, basic premium to business VIP, I'm not going to add 0.001 cents to it because you're using Velo.
I'm thinking that it's just such a superpower to drive price so low that it's effectively near zero. Obviously, it's not when we're talking about millions of containers a day, but for any customer, it's near zero. And this means that you can basically price, and we had this conversation both in the community and on the YouTube channel a lot, pricing by your cost versus pricing by value. And if you manage to make the marginal cost near zero, then it's kind of a no-brainer to charge for the value you deliver. So
yeah, of course, if you're going to have huge traffic or lots of data on your site, then we'll figure out what's the right model. But if you're like most websites, they have, let's face it, most websites, they have 10 people coming to the website a day, or maybe 10 people coming to the website a week. And 10 people coming for a website a day, 100, 1,000 people coming to the website a day. Even for that, it's low traffic.
Yeah, exactly that. And if 5 minutes costs cents, then 1,000 a day will cost a few dollars at most. Like it's
not 5 minutes that cost a cent. 5 minutes cost a 100th of a cent. 0.01.
Exactly. Yes. So we're basically talking about like what is considered even a popular blog to be a few dollars a day. Like that's kind of amazing. So I think we kind of got all excited about the architecture, and the thing that I'm really curious about, like the whole project seems like had a lot of really unconventional choices, or choices that I can imagine a lot of other architects kind of had in their head, but then like nobody in the company will ever agree to, and we will kind of move on from that. So I'm kind of curious, like you decided, how did even Velo get started? And then like, okay, you started it. How did you decide to build it as essentially a dogfooding project? And with all those like really very opinionated architecture decisions across the entire way. So yeah, give us a hint on like What did Velo day one look like?
You're actually raising here a few different things here. So one observation that we made very, very fast is to understand that our business, our world, I'll start the story at the start. I read in 1998 a book called something Delphi 4. And that book was a lot about Delphi, but actually had a very interesting claim. He said, in our business, you can foresee the future because there's no big jumps, there's evolution. And everything that we call jumps are just another step in the evolution. And then from that book in 98, I've learned microservice architecture because that was what was the book about. It actually taught me all the basics and all the ideas of microservice architecture in 98, 12 years before we actually knew the name. Now, and it did that because it said, hey, we started with one server, my mainframes, then we moved to 2-tier, then we moved to n-tier. And then as you take that and extrapolate forward, you get to microservices. And he explained all the concepts that are going to be there. Now, with that in mind, I've done another extrapolation, which is basically when we started, we used to buy our own computers and install them in data centers. I actually been in a company that did that. And then we moved to AWS, which gave us VMs over the cloud, but we still needed to to install the OS and everything on it. And then App Engine arrived and gave some more opinionated thing that is just need to do a backend, my backend, but it was already, I didn't care about the underlying stuff. And then as that continued and got to Lambda and Lambda functions, it was even more opinionated and you just need to write your function. But notice what happens here. There are two different axes going on. One is you're becoming way more productive. And as you do that, you're in a much more opinionated environment. Being in a much more opinionated environment means where you're paying with currency for being effective. And the currency you're paying with is freedom. Yeah. You're doing a deal with the devil. You're trading your freedom for efficiency. That is what the story of serverless. And that is what we said is, let's take that to extreme. Let's be as opinionated as we can and give it the most productive environment that we can. And this is what we try to do in Velo. And so you have no choice of database. You can choose now if you're doing external, but when we started, you had no choice of database, no choice of backend. You can't really write your frontend. Your Wix is using React, but you cannot write in React. You can only use our components in our drag and drop environment. And now we're working very hard on opening the environment, giving all kinds of different places where you can actually tweak where you need to. But it's always the game. The game is you first close everything up, give a very opinionated environment, and then start opening it up in the ways that make sense in an opinionated environment. And you've seen it happening with App Engine is a great example. When we had App Engine in 2008, it was a subset of Java. Today, App Engine is a container that can run anything you want. You can drop on cloud, run anything you want, basically. And it will just run it the same way as App Engine.
And I'm thinking that in many ways, doing it with Wix made even more sense because Wix itself was already very successful as something that makes people productive while being very opinionated and not giving you a lot of choices. You want a website fast and we will tell you how to do it, essentially. So you already attracted the kind of people who were willing to be more productive by buying into someone else's opinions.
Yes, while keeping one important thing, which we don't compromise on the result. You want to get your pixel perfect website, and we don't compromise on that. Same thing is in Velo. Velo, you can look at Velo as like, a lot of times people compare us to low-code tools. All the low-code tools they're great tools, very effective, but they are always limited. You can't really do everything with them. In Velo, what we said, we're not going to be a low-code tool. We're a full code platform. You write no JS code, so you can do whatever you want. Anyway, you asked the second question, which is about dogfooding. So the story about dogfooding actually started by, let's say, a mistake in Wix. And when we started, we had a Flash. We started as a Flash company, not as an HTML company. And
I had no idea.
we started the Flash company. Actually, the reason I officially joined Wix was that I was coming back from New Zealand, and a gig, Yoav Kaplan, gave me, it was 2010, he can tell me, hey, you know, there is this device called the iPhone. It doesn't run Flash, but who cares? But today, Apple released the iPad, and it is for websites, and it doesn't run Wix because we're Flash. So figure out what to do with that. So a month later, I had a POC of converting sites from Flash to HTML. Anyway, the point I wanted to make wasn't that. It was about our first editor was built on Flash. And we built that using the Wix editor. The same editor we gave our customers to build websites. We gave that to our designers to build our design tool, the design tool itself. And that was the first time we actually done dogfooding in Wix. And that was very successful. The reason was that our designers were telling us, hey, you're doing a bad product. I as a designer don't want to work with that product. And they had to work on that product because they were building our product with it. And you actually got the pain. You got the real user pains as you do that.
So Wix was basically Wix on Wix almost from day one. Like
almost
sounds like the first Wix website was built on Wix.
It's not the first Wix website, but it's the design environment of Wix. The first Wix product was built on Wix. Then as we moved to HTML, that was abandoned because of all kinds of reasons. But as we got to Velo, we were a little bit more experienced, and we've learned two very important aspects about dogfooding. Obviously, dogfooding is very important. I'll get that in a sec. But one thing we learned in Velo is target your external customers. You will a product to your customers, not for your internal users. And that is super important to keep that in mind, because if you're building a product to your internal users, you're going to do workarounds that you'll never be able to take down and get the product to users that are not from your company. But the second thing is, once you're letting your people in the company use your products to work as if they are external company, instead of external users, they're going to give you very, very valuable feedback. And they're going to tell you that all of the different problematic things in your product. But then you need to also make sure that they don't do workarounds. And the reason that anytime they're doing a workaround, they're actually working around a deficiency in the product that your users are going to be facing. And they're going to leave your product because of this deficiency, because they don't have the workaround. They don't have any way to overcome that.
Interesting. But it does also mean, like, I'm trying to think what is the implication on releases, because you do want to release the good cadence. And if you discover a bug that prevents you from releasing, and I'm assuming not all use cases are that generic, right? Some stuff, some customers will face, other customers may not care about. It just seems like there's tons of nuance. Do you like hold the hard line, absolutely no workarounds in production ever? Or is it something you're more flexible on?
Of course, more flexible. At the end of the game, we're managing projects, and you have to be effective. You have to keep in mind what you want to achieve. One of the groups that are, today, me and Avi Guzhansky is working with me and managing our groups. We're managing 6 groups in Wix. And one of the groups is the Wix multilingual product. Now, this product was created 3 years ago, and it is Wix on Wix product. It is built actually using Velo, and that was in a very early stage of the product, and it brought a lot of challenges to the team who were developing that product. We've learned a lot from it, and we've managed to do a lot with the product, and today we're doing even more with it. Having said that, we had to do some workarounds in order to make a product functional and make the product working for everyone.
How
just
do
to give
you
an example.
prioritize your, like, the other products inside Wix built on Velo versus customer feedback? Like, if everyone tells you the same thing, it's easy, but if your team wants some functionality and maybe it's a bit advanced and not a lot of users ask for it, it seems hard to prioritize.
Well, keep in mind that one of the values in Wix is that we want to give our users excellent products. And we want to care for our users. That means that we will always prioritize getting a good solution to our users if we can. But then in that space of what is a good solution to our users, there's lots of space.
Yeah.
And sometimes our UX expert is going to be sad because that didn't really get the exact UX you wanted. And sometimes the developer is going to be a little bit sad because he had to do it in a way that looks a bit ugly. Because they had to do a code workaround that our customers would be doing, but he couldn't do it in the way he wished to. And sometimes we say, hey, you know what? We learned from it, but we're going now to do the workaround after we've learned. And we make sure that someone is actually going to fix that. And sometimes we don't go and fix it, just go and fix it on the spot. But the idea is, what you want to do with a Wix on Wix project is you want to do two different things. One is you want to prove to yourself time and time again that you have the right product, you have a good product, that it is more effective. And you want to see not your, you talked about Wix people, Wix users, which are building the website. You don't want in Velo, I don't want those users to say, hey, it's a cool product, Velo. I want the 20 years experienced developer to say, hey, this is more effective. And actually, I've heard from developers that are 20 years experience, they're saying, I don't want to write to React anymore. I don't want to code the UI anymore. Come on, let's stop that. I would just want to let my designer build my screen on Velo and I'll write the code. Stop with that nonsense of having me need to implement the UI. Now,
I can totally hear you describing me.
but the funny thing is, it's actually there's actually two very unique edges, because there's people we have customers like that are super experienced and are saying, I've done enough React and Angular and whatever, Bootstrap and jQuery. When we talk about experienced people, 20 years experience, they still know what jQuery is. I'm not sure that if you're
That's a good point. If anyone doesn't know what it is, they should not look it up. It's
too old. Anyway, but and you have those people, and on the other end, you have people that learned how to code on Velo because it's very opinionated, but it's also all organized. It takes you really 5 minutes from opening the environment to publishing a production-grade application. And with that in mind, we have people that actually learn to code on Velo and are doing amazing stuff. But then in the middle, between those two groups, there is an whole area of developers that are super excited because they've just learned React, or they just learned Vue, or just learned Stencil, or looked at the stuff that other innovations, Svelte, and so on. And they're super excited that they want to code the UI. And for them, looking at Velo is, hey, but I don't code the UI, so that's strange. How do I work with that? And for them, actually, we have the option to write web components in the product. If you really, really, really want to do that, you can just write your own web components using the standard web components. I'm standard, basically, and very verbose stuff. You can use Stencil if you want, which is great. Adam Bradley did an amazing job with Stencil. And
I think it almost sounds like a holy grail, right? Because you can have something in few clicks without knowing anything, very no code, immediate experience. And then if you actually want to get more opinionated about certain things, you actually, like Wix will allow you to drop down to more specific.
That's the point. That's the point. When you go into, lots of applications, we just finished in Wix we've taken a group in Wix to build the Wix Live project. It's an internal project in Wix, built Wix, built on Velo. And this project is basically a home for the Wix employee, connecting all the functions. Now I'm talking about all the functions. It's the employee directory, it's salary, it's reporting sick days, reporting vacation days, it's ordering flights, it's getting news. It's we have the Wix What, which is basically a coffee shop with all kinds of services for people, from a barber to whatever. You can order all of those there as well. And all of that is based on, Velo, the coding platform. A lot of the services are based on Wix Booking for basically book services. And we're trying to reuse as much features from Wix in that project as we can. And that's actually went live like a month ago, a few weeks ago, for Wix employees, 6,000 employees, enterprise grade security. I know I was involved in that stuff. And lots of different things. So it's connected to the, I have no idea what system is actually managing who are the employees in Wix, some IT system that we have. And our IT organization basically talked to us saying, we are a company called Wix. We don't know you, Wix. We're the IT of Wix. We have no idea who Wix is. We're an enterprise, and we want to have a solution to build that product for us in a secure way, in a very effective way. And you, for all you care, you'll provide. We're a different company. You're a provider. Let's figure out how to build that.
I'm thinking about how many hard problems you and your team are tackling, because obviously, like building a product with itself is a big problem in its own right, and running other people's arbitrary code is a big problem in its own right. And you've added doing it at scale, doing it at low cost, doing it in a way that is enterprise grade security. Was there any hard problem that you and your team looked at and said, nope, not going there? This is the one thing we're not going to tackle?
I think that most of the problems that we could tackle, we did. For instance, a hard problem we had, a very surprising problem, we added a feature which is a scheduler. So you can actually have scheduled functions. And we have them out to granularity of 1 hour. And then what we've seen is that we have traffic spikes every hour on the hour. And that start to be very annoying because you need to over provision in quite a lot, and trying to make a spike of 3x, 3x4, and in the middle you don't really have a traffic rate. Yeah. What we ended up doing is now we have another grid, works in the same technology, but that other grid is auto scaling and is just for async tasks, just for the scheduled tasks, and also have events, and it's going to run for events and scheduled tasks. Events are talking about business events, not regular events. You think about someone finishing a purchase in a site, yeah, or booking a service, and we can get that business event and react to it in code. Or,
by the way, I'm from the Kafka background. If a business event is a system event as well, like if your business events do not map to system level events, you probably build something slightly wrong. But yeah, that's a different topic. I'm still kind of like so it really seems like part of your DNA is to never say no to something that your users really need. Like if you identify a real need in the world, you're going to find a way to deliver it to customers. And this really requires a lot of flexibility in the architecture. Like, did you ever, I don't know, how many rewrites did Velo require when a new need showed up and you're like, oh, we didn't plan for that one?
So surprisingly, the Velo architecture is actually very stable. We had one architecture that didn't work out that we dropped within 8 months. And the second architecture that we've done is actually working until today, or the core of it is working until today. We did replace our custom implementation of the grid with Kubernetes as the underlying layer, and kind of deleted tons of code. And we did do a journey on the database from physical collections on Mongo to logical collections, and now back to combination of physical and logical collections. We have, just to give you my understanding of the size, we have over 50 million tables running, user tables running.
So Mongo is one of the things you're opinionated about, or I don't know. Maybe I'm asking again things I shouldn't be, but
no, it's okay. We're not really opinionated. We've chosen Mongo simply because Mongo is very nice to front-end developers.
Yes,
it's very JavaScript oriented, and it allows us to create a Wix data, which is our data layer, which is it's very simple, but very JavaScript oriented. You don't need to create a schema in order to work with it. You can create a schema, which would help you with the user interface, but you don't have to do that. And so it becomes very, very simple to work with. But then we actually extended the architecture. Now we're refactoring that so that we have the Mongo provider, we have providers from Wix for all kinds of business functions. You can get the products catalog, the contacts catalog, service catalog, so on, orders, SDP drivers, and those are actually mapped to services that go to microservices, all kinds of stacks over there. And you can also connect your own, an external connector on GCP, AWS, Azure. We have an open source project that allows you to connect your own database, and you can just extend and implement our SPI and do whatever you want there. And we don't even care if you actually have a database, as long as you're going,
Basically, if I am Postgres fanatic, which a lot of people I think are, I can say, okay, my database is actually AWS Postgres to Aurora. I'm writing an SPI that will be kind of my Aurora shim, and here we go.
It's actually going to be simpler. You're going to download basically a container and install it on your account in AWS, configure it a little bit, give us the URL secret, and that's done.
That's kind of amazing. I really love the customer obsession that you guys are showing, like clearly really thinking about customers having a great experience.
One of the things maybe would help to understand how we're doing that. Said I have 6 groups. One of the groups is called a outreach. And this is actually not a product group. It's a very unique group that sits in the area between what we're building, which is database, compute, IDEs, APIs, and what our customers need, which is they need a solution for their internal system application, or they need a solution for that enterprise deal, or they need something else. And this team is basically doing something which is kind of professional services, kind of building projects for all kinds of different stuff. And we're doing that not as a cost center, intentionally. We're not trying to make money there. We're trying to challenge our system. And we're building real projects or interesting projects, but the reason why we're doing that is in order to learn. And we have like over 10 people that's what they're doing day on, day off. They would either go and help a customer of ours when they have a problem, if that is interesting enough, or they're going to take a project, I'll give you an example of a project that we've done 2 years ago. We've been approached by the Israeli government. They wanted, with the corona, they wanted to call elderly people in Israel and figure out if they need any help in medicine or with anything else. And they needed to have a call center to be able to call those 1 million people with a fleet of volunteers. And needed that call center now. Basically, it was a call on Thursday, and they were like, "Can we have it in 2 weeks?" And guess what? They had a call center working in 2 weeks. We had 800 volunteers working with it, calling. We managed to call 150,000 people before the first wave ended. And that's why we stopped, by the way, because the first wave of Corona ended in Israel. And that we had integrations with the Israeli government identification system. The database was on a Google Cloud in an account owned by the government, MS SQL. Twilio for the telephony, all of that, system for reports, system for volunteers, system for stuff. All that was built in 2 weeks, another 2 weeks of clearing out some bugs, and made a huge impact. And that was built by the same outreach group. That's one reason why we have that group.
That's
what we've done.
Okay. I kind of was impressed earlier by all the hard problems you solved, but you can add making government function efficiently to the list, which is definitely...
Government are very, very efficient in a crisis mode, not in regular mode.
Israeli government is efficient in crisis mode. I'm not sure it's true all over the world, but that was incredibly impressive.
Yeah. We've done another thing. There was a Hertz. They tried to create a website with Accenture, and that failed. There was a lawsuit and stuff like that. So what we said, you know what? Let's try to see if we can build something the scale of Hertz. And we created a site called an internal site on Velo. It's not called Hertz. It has nothing to do with Hertz, but it was a car rental company. And we looked at the public information on Wikipedia. Hertz have 500,000 cars, 10,000 locations, and there's estimates of 80% cars being rented, average rental is 3 days, so on. So we created a model around that, which ended up in about 1,000 concurrent users that have to work with that system. And then we created a fleet of bots that would simulate those users. And we brought up that fleet of bots up to 1,000, I think it was 850 users running, and we ran them against our system, against that website we've built. And of course, it wasn't trivial, because when you build something at that scale, you need to be very aware of what you're doing. But the end of the game is that our system worked. And we've actually learned a lot of stuff from our user experience, from what the difficulties that our users are facing in building something like that, what feedback they're getting when they're doing something wrong. When you're doing something right, it works, but what if you do something wrong? We've learned some stuff about our internal process, because one of the reasons why one of the failures we had there was caused by human mistake in some setup. But again, this is stuff that if you're not doing it yourself, as you're trying to build your own project on your own system, then the next time you're going to see that is when your user facing that, or actually you won't, because you're going to go somewhere else. So this is another, it's not really Wix on Wix. It's a team that is doing that synthetically for us, but it also becomes the knowledge center that drives the Wix on Wix processes.
And it does, and it sounds like they are working closely with customer, but not as you said, not exactly like professional services. So the Hertz project sounds like it was done in a certain way, but it started because I'm assuming you guys wanted to sell to Hertz.
That's a benchmark. This one is a benchmark where we've taken inspiration from Hertz. It's not.
Okay.
But that's internal benchmark. We have other projects like that are actually working with real startups that are working on a system that we're helping them, or doing projects with, there is a Wix Enterprise initiative working with that as well, or with just customers that we're picking up from different problems, trying to help them. But the majority is a lot of the understanding comes from the Wix on Wix projects, which are helping them as well. And there's, I think that there was a point. I had the Wix like half a year ago, where Avishai, the CEO, comes and says, "Yeah, you have to see this project that is being built on Velo." I'm like, no, I don't. Actually, I'm actually very, very happy that I don't know about it, and because it means that it's working. And a week later, the Omer Shai, the CMO of Wix, comes and says, "Hey, you have to look at that project. The Wix post-reg pages, after registration, the main funnel. They've built all of that experience in Velo. It's super exciting. You have to see that." No, I don't. I actually am very happy that I don't need to see that. It means that it's working. The product is working. It's working well. I have no problem. I need to see that if there is escalation. If there's not, it means I have a win. I've done the right thing. And they were super excited by those projects.
It is very exciting. trying to keep an eye on time, and I think we're running toward the end. And one of the things you mentioned to me, that yet another thing you said that blew my mind, is actually the organizational model that you have for Velo. And I try to ask you, what is your role? Are you leading engineering? Are you leading product? Now I hear that you have an internal professional services / benchmarking team. Like maybe you also have support. Like what is the team that is building it, and how do you lead it?
So I can say that I'm not sure. I'm not saying, I don't know if that's unique or not, but my philosophy is that I prefer to not manage alone. I always manage with a partner. In the start of the Velo project for a few years, I had Ziv Shalev with me, and I have Avi Guzhansky with me for the last 3 years, almost 4 years, I think. And we didn't really have a set roles on that relationship. If you would ask people from outside, they won't really know. You might say that I'm more towards vision and product oriented, and that Avi is more toward process and R&D and execution. But Avi is also a great product person and very methodological in product. And I'm an architect, and I'm coming from the deep down technology, and I can manage a lot of stuff. I actually built the Wix culture, and with Aviran and a lot of people in Wix. So it's more about the trust that you have and working together, but there's even something more than that. When you work with people and someone is doing something that is surprising, that you didn't expect, you can react in two ways. One way is, why are you doing that? Have you asked me? Have you synced with me? Is it the right thing to do? That's one way. And that way stops people. It basically creates a very negative environment. The other way is, well, that sounds cool. Let me help you to make it better.
Yeah, and even though it may be the exact same outcome, the approach is extremely different. Right?
And what happens is that you create a positive feedback. And when you create that positive feedback between two managers, you get a win, because what happens is that you have lots of redundancy. I can go to a month vacation and I know everything's going to work out. There's no problem. But then when we are in the office, when we're working, there's a lot of times where we're together in meetings and a lot of times where we're not. And we can do more stuff. We can focus on different aspects. So even though Avi is more on the execution side and more on the process side and the R&D side, he's actually managing a lot of our relationships with marketing, versus I'm managing a lot of the relationships with DevRel. And there's no real rule here. There's no line that I can say here. And everything that I'm doing, you will know. Everything he's doing, I will know about. Now, in our organization, I have 6 groups. The Velo group, there's a group that is building the Velo user experience. It has 2 managers. We have the Wix data group, it has 2 managers. We have the multilingual group, it has 2 managers, and so on. I really believe in that model. A lot of times, one of them would be more product oriented and one would be more R&D oriented. But at the end of the game, it's more about the people than the roles. I will say I'm hiring a role to the person and not the person to the role. Because I would adjust the role.
If I'm an individual contributor in one of those groups, I could have my one-on-one with one of the managers, both, either.
I would have in both of them, because it's about communication, it's about trust, it's about working with people. But the important thing is to understand that even though you hired someone to a specific role, you assume you hire them for a specific role. You have the person. That person is going to define the role in the right way that fits that person.
Yeah.
Now, you need to find the other person that would complete it.
Interesting, yeah. Yeah. I'm trying to think because like it seems like you have a talent. I can see you're describing things in a way that just makes a lot of sense. But it seems also like there could be a lot of like risks in that, right? Like obviously it's almost like they have to agree. So it's almost like you have to get consensus, which could be slower, maybe?
Well, not really. They don't work in isolation. They also need to work with people. And when you look at what is the role of a manager? When you're a team leader, you manage your employees. When you're middle management, what you're managing is your relationships with other middle managements.
Yeah.
You manage the relationships sideways, where you're in my level, you're managing your managers. My role today is to manage my managers, the Wix management teams, and to make sure that it makes sense, everything together. Now, what it means is that if two people, let's say Jacob and Ophir, that are managing development, they don't agree, they have me and Avi to help them.
Yeah, makes sense.
And our role is to give them the tools to make a decision, not to make the decision for them. But and in that regard, it doesn't really matter if it's me or Avi. Each one of us can do that. We'll give them different tools because we're different people, we're thinking in different ways. But at the end of the game, we're going to give them tools to resolve that. And if they have trust between them, they will resolve it.
It sounds really fantastic. So let's maybe finish with this takeaway, like that you can really build something in a way that is completely unique, almost from start to finish, like the culture, the development process, and even architectural choices all kind of have a twist. So I think our listeners must have learned a lot of good ideas. If anyone got a good idea that they're like, oh, I'm totally going to try that on my product, definitely comment here. And if you actually used Velo or now planning to use Velo, absolutely comment below, because it will be interesting to see what it looks like from the customer perspective.
Oh, if I can add one last thing, yes. We are going to have our first Wix Developer Conference in the summer. And it's going to be, it's wixdevcon.com. And anyone who wants to hear and see what we're all about, invited to look this up.
And it's in-person conference?
In-person conference in New York. 2 days conference.
Like it's time to book tickets.
Yeah.
Amazing. And you actually, like the conference will be obviously people developing on Wix, but is it also Wix developers will talk about the architecture kind of talks?
I think it's going to be more oriented towards product announcements and for developers. I'm talking about, not the regular Wix. And about the Wix architecture, we're talking actually a lot in conferences. There's, up until the Corona time, we would send speakers to lots of conferences all the time. I had personally years where I was talking in more than 10 conferences myself, even though I didn't apply to anything, just happened somehow. But basically what we're saying is that if you're not a competitor, we're going to talk about everything, unless we're really shouldn't talk about it.
Yeah. I just remembered I first heard about Wix at QCon New York 2015. I met a few nice Israeli guys there. We had lunch and I learned quite a bit from that. So definitely sending developers to conferences was a good way for Wix to really create a brand as a place with strong development and strong developer culture and strong architectures, and a good place. So congratulations on that too. I think that was also something you did successfully. Cool. So thank you so much for sharing all this.
Thank you for your time. That's super exciting for me. And hopefully we'll see people in our DevCon.